Welcome to the Misophonia Podcast. This is Season 5, Episode 10. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have misophonia. This week, my conversation is with Sadie. Sadie is a model, actress, and student, and introvert based in New York City. Really interesting to hear her coping tips while working in places that are much more, you'd say, subjective and collaborative than your typical cubicle job or work-from-home job. This is also Sadie's first time talking about miso with anyone outside family. So please, if you like to show some support, you can follow her on Instagram at Miller and Sadie, and I'll have links in the show notes. And our Instagram, by the way, is Misophonia Podcast. Speaking of support, I hope all my American-based listeners survived the Thanksgiving break. We're kind of in the the holiday hurricane with Christmas coming up. So for some of us, there are lots of challenges with family and eating, and lots of people around and eating and traveling and eating. So I wish everyone the best, and just remember that you can always throw on some headphones and listen to a new episode every week, and there's some really amazing ones coming up. And speaking of amazing episodes, here is my conversation with Sadie. Sadie, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me, actually.
Yeah. So I kind of see in the video a little bit. So you're not home. Whereabouts are you kind of usually based?
Well, I actually go back and forth between New York City and Indiana, and sometimes Chicago, depending, and Cincinnati as well. So just kind of in between that little triangle, if you will.
Little triangle, Midwest, Northeast triangle. Cool.
Yeah.
And then you want to tell people kind of what you usually do?
Well, I am an actress, model, and student right now. I started college around actually the day that they announced that COVID, they shut down all the flights and everything, and I was home for a bit for a job. And then they canceled all the flights. So I figured that day, since I wasn't going to the airport, they were enrolling, online classes. So I just kind of drove over to my community college and decided to sign up, and luckily it worked out. So
cool.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah.
I took a couple gap years in between high school and college, so
yeah. No, that's good.
Never really
been
my thing.
Yeah. No, that's good. And then, and so you're in New York City doing actress modeling. How I don't think I've ever. I think I've had actresses on, but I'm curious. Just in those fields, we might as well start with what's the misophonia situation? Because there's obviously a lot of auditioning. You have to, you got to perform, but there's random people around just kind of setting shit up and probably eating on set and whatnot. And so, and you have to, your demeanor you can't start throwing death glares all the time, right?
So no, because it's and if you act a little, funky or rude or stingy, people don't want to be around that. And typically I've noticed throughout the years, they're hiring you not just for you, but for your personality. And now these days, of course, the social media followers are thrown in and all that jazz, which I don't really understand. But, you always have to keep a pleasant face and, be helpful and, kind of match your personality to others, but still be yourself at the same time, which has been really hard to navigate throughout the years. But, I feel like I've kind of just learned just to be more so myself. And if I am in a situation where they start to break for lunch, or the makeup artist is smacking on gum, that kind of thing, then I just kind of learned that my go-to excuse is to be like, oh, I have to call my mom, or, oh, I have to check out on a flight, or, oh, I have to call my agent about this, that, and I leave the room for a bit and take, if I'm, if it is during lunch hour, I'll take whatever it is that I'm eating, or just a little something, and just kind of
cool off a little bit.
Sounds horrible, but sometimes I fake a phone call just to, get out of the room for a minute.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do. People are taking notes right now. Trust me, everyone's going to be using that excuse. That's great. You got to do what you got to do to recover. We know how the amplitudes of our triggers can be so crazy that we need to take some time off to just kind of get back and be productive. And I guess in your industry, there's that whole diva label, and we're super nice people, but you don't want to get thrown into that bucket because that could really
No.
affect your career. And it
Yeah.
doesn't, it's not even accurate. So,
No, and it's a little frustrating because it's nothing personal against the people
right,
that are in the room. It's never ever personal.
right.
It's just the way our brains work. It's just the way our brain functions, and that's what I have to tell myself. And I try not to be weird about it either, because as a kid, I didn't really know how to navigate triggers or noises, and I would react. And you know, kids don't really know how to act around them, anyways.
Right,
And,
right.
they're kids. And so being a kid surrounded by noises, I didn't do that great. But for some reason on set, I always seem to collect myself, probably because I had that hanging over my head that if I acted the way I usually did, then I wouldn't be hired ever again. So it always was my calm place. It was always my
Yeah.
normal little haven. And so I think that if I did not have modeling, I would not really know how to.
Oh,
I
so
would
you,
know
yeah,
how to.
that's really interesting. So you kind of use it to your advantage. You kind of like try to think of it as your little refuge, I guess. Yeah. Okay. That's
Many
great because yeah, that can kind of like, yeah, just help propel you in your work.
Yeah.
Just use that to be, yeah, if, yeah, people using their work as a refuge. I mean, that's great. But you said that if you act how you normally act, like how do you normally act then?
Well, I act a lot better than what I did when I was younger. I'll tell you that for
Okay. Yeah, we'll
sure.
get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that
Yeah.
for sure.
But for the most part now these days, I don't do what I did as a kid. I usually just kind of suffer in silence, which sounds horrible. And,
We all do
sorry
that.
guys, but
Yeah.
I keep headphones with me at all times. I have like 4 pairs of wireless earbuds, two of me, I have two of them with me at all times. Of course, if I'm on the subway or walking the street, I only have one in just in case, something
Oh, yeah,
happens.
of course.
Gotta have one in and one out at
For
all times.
safety. Yeah, yeah, that's a good
Oh,
tip.
yeah. So, but when it comes down to it, earbuds are great. I discovered that earplugs aren't really my thing because it seems like as if my ears search for noises, unfortunately. So, earplugs aren't really my go-to. It's more so earbuds. And it's nice to have noise cancel out all the other noise. If I'm listening to
Yeah.
podcasts, sometimes it depends on the podcast, which is something I brought up to you as well, that your podcast is so nice because you cancel out, all the swallows and triggers. And I
I
appreciate that
tried to, yeah.
so much, so much. I cannot, exaggerate that enough. But yeah, I think that with earbuds are nice. And when I was younger, I used to make tally marks, which sounds a little odd. But if I were in a room with somebody, I would, if they were chewing gum or sniffing, especially with sniffing, I would make a tally mark for each time that they did it. And then when I would leave the room, I would look at all the tally marks and I'd count them all up, and typically show them to my mom and be like, "Oh my gosh, did you see how many times so and so sniffed?" And but I don't do that anymore. I just kind of keep to myself. And
What did your mom say? Did you hold that up as kind of like proof as to like, look at what's happening to me? Like, you know, 263 times an hour. It's like,
yeah,
or whatever it was.
and it's amazing how many times
Yeah.
somebody can sniff or pop their gum in an hour. Let me tell you that. But usually she would just roll her eyes at it. But it felt good to have some sort of evidence, and even though I know it wasn't helping me very much, it was just nice just to put it down in physical form.
Yeah. I don't want to plug. Well, I will slight plug it for the Mr. Funny podcast app. I do have like a journal where you can kind of like enter, when you've been triggered, kind of whether it was like red or green or whatever. So, in the hopes that maybe not for your mom, but people can take it to their employer or a therapist to try to like prove that because I'm hearing about people getting fired sometimes for the way
I
they
believe
react to
it.
misophonia. So, and then going to court. So this, I think things even your tally sheet could maybe be used in the court of law one day. Not yours in particular, but I think these
Right.
things are useful to we need to sometimes document this stuff because people don't believe it, and will sometimes roll eyes. Did your mom family eventually kind of figure out that, hey, this is real, maybe we should take this seriously?
Yeah, it took them a few years for them to get used to it. I had my first episode that I can remember when I was around 8 or 7, and usually at the supper table was when it would really come out. And it took my family a good while, especially my dad, because I would get on my dad the most. His side of the family, they tend to chew, and that sort of, they have their own way of eating, and my family has their own way of eating, and I would get on him the most about it. And I could tell that that really annoyed him to death. And with my other siblings as well. And, I feel so bad about it now that I look back on it, but I couldn't help it. But it took him a good while just to get used to how I would react, which
Yeah, yeah.
wasn't the best way because I was 7 or 8 at the time. And, I didn't know how to react to things. And
Like
luckily
screaming, throwing, marching,
I
banging.
Yeah, banging.
Yeah.
Every single time I would hear something, like a chewing, or if my brother would swallow really loud, I would bang the table,
Mm.
which sounds horrible, now that I look back on it.
Well,
But at the time,
you don't
and
know what to do. Yeah.
yeah, I would
Probably
have
think
to,
everybody's thinking the same way. And
yeah, I would leave the room and I would go into the dining room or into our living room and just eat by myself. Or sometimes my family would just give up and just leave the table and just leave me sitting there, which didn't happen often at all. Just very, very rarely when was having a particularly bad day.
yeah.
But a lot of banging on the table, or I would snap my fingers as well.
Yeah.
Um, and eventually I learned to turn that into tally marks. And then I just kind of sat on my hands.
Yeah. And it was your dad kind of your first trigger? It sounds like that's out of the family. Um,
Yeah, and I remember hearing on your podcast you saying that typically it's the dad, if I'm correct, that usually sparks misophonia in a
I
lot of
would,
people.
yeah,
I'm right about
right.
that? I'm not so sure.
I don't know if typically might be too strong a word, but it's definitely common. Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, just in the last 24 hours, I've talked to 2 or 3 people for the podcast, and
Wow.
it's been the dad. So that comes up a lot, but it's also often, I mean, it's like, if you look at the probability, yeah, I would say parents are definitely the highest, and then there are some people where it's not a factor, but yeah, it seems to be the parents are tend more often than not are the first, and if it's one of the parents, it's usually the dad. So, but
That's your dad's.
it's not hard or fast. I mean, I think that was the case for me. Uh, so, do you know around that time was there like anything out of the ordinary happening at home, stressful, maybe changing jobs or cities or other problems at home? I don't know.
No problems at home. The
Mm.
first episode that I remember, I was in my second grade classroom and we're having a pizza party. And I'm pretty sure for a lot of people that sounds like a great time.
Yeah.
But for me, pizza parties and, classroom birthdays were just nightmares because I, as a kid, before preschool or anything, I was very social. I would go up to anybody, anytime, and just chat away. And I had no problem with strangers. I just loved to talk and interact with other kids. And then I started school, and I'm not really one to go into like depression or like anxiety or anything like that, because that's just, I'm very private about that sort of thing. And, I don't want to be offensive or, to people that have some serious cases of it. But I had a little bit of undiagnosed but pretty strong social anxiety, and I
Yeah.
still do. I'm a hardcore introvert. But in second grade, I was having some trouble with other kids in my class, particularly, with a few girls and that typical elementary school thing. And so at this pizza party, this kid next to me, God love him, but he was just going to town on this pizza slice, and I just broke down. And that's when I
Mm.
had, and that first realization that, when it came down to chewing or sniffing or coughing or clicking or anything,
Yeah.
I was a goner. So
And that was before, so that was really first before kind of you're noticing your dad and stuff. Like you
yeah,
remember that was
I,
going, yeah.
I would say later on that night when I came home, that's when I started to notice it.
Yeah.
In that
I've
classroom.
heard that it's kind of been kind of a switch in some situations like
Yeah.
that.
That's the best way I can describe it. It was like a big switch, and I haven't really been able to shift my mind back to where I was,
Yeah,
before school, but yeah, it stayed that way.
yeah, yeah. And so you said it took a few years, your parents to kind of come around to it. In the meantime, were other things outside of the house also triggering you? Like you're in school. Was school becoming also a problem as well
But
in general? Yeah.
it was for sure. I was always kind of the oddball in my class anyway. Um, but this did not help. It really made me stand out. And I remember specifically this one time in around the fourth grade, I believe, a kid sitting across from me, across the desk, he had this sniffing
Mm.
problem, and it just drove me nuts. And I begged my teacher to let me bring in earplugs. She let me bring in earplugs, did not really help. But on the outside, with class, with other kids, it definitely had it took a toll for sure,
Do you
especially when
think
it came down to like birthday parties and sleepovers. I couldn't deal sometimes.
so? You had friends that you were having sleepovers with and stuff. So it's not like you were totally blocked off,
No,
but
no,
then so you'd be yeah, I mean, you'd have friends, but then there would be situations kind of like with us. We are out in the world now, and we have friends, but it's just like something happens, we need to recover. So you're experiencing that then, like a little bit of oddball with friends, but then you'd get triggered, like
I
doing
would.
basic kid stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and it
Would
was
you
just,
say anything at that point? Like when I guess so you never said anything. Did what your parents start to do when they start to realize that it was a thing? They start to look it up or find a therapist or anything or
well, I did do therapy for a while when I was
mm,
younger, mostly for the classmate thing, with girls. I always had a tough time making friends with other girls. I went to a very small school during elementary
uh,
school, and you know, switched over in middle school, luckily, to a public school. But before then, I just had a few, social anxiety, which I hate to say because it's, such a label in my mind personally. But um, I just went to therapy just to deal with a few things,
okay.
and luckily, she did help a little bit. We would talk about it for sure, but I don't remember any coping because this was way back, in the earlier 2000s.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really a label yet. It wasn't given the word misophonia. It was just
Right.
seen as somebody who was just annoying or something. And
Gotcha. So you were going for social anxiety stuff not related to misophonia, but
yeah,
then it would kind of come up in the conversation.
right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, we thought it would tie into me being, shy and introverted and that sort of thing. But really, it was just a completely different thing on all by
Gotcha.
itself.
Okay, okay. And then like later on, as after elementary school, you're into high school. Things are, um, you know, getting more serious. Like school's getting more serious and whatnot. You're probably meeting more friends, and um, how did that progress? And people are getting more. They get a little bolder with eating in class and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm
Chewing
curious.
gum.
Now your 2 years of gap year started to make a lot more sense. I think, but yeah, how are things? We also tend to kind of like the our triggers kind of start to proliferate, where you start to get more and more things that you were sensitive to.
Yeah. Well, I throughout middle school and high school, that's when things started to really roll modeling wise with me.
Mm.
I did a lot of traveling as a kid with my parents and my siblings, and we would be off in like Miami or New York or Chicago or LA for a few weeks on end, and that was kind of nice because it took me away from all of those triggers and all of those noises, but also took me away from friends as well. So when I came back home, I just came back home. I didn't
Mm.
really go to any parties. That's, now that I look back and I'm
Yeah,
like, oh gosh. But it was nice because when I would be on set, the misophonia thing for the most part until lunchtime or break time or when somebody would bring out the gum or the coffee, it just kind of went away. And luckily, the main triggers that I dealt with were my families. But in the school cafeteria, I only had a few friends that I would sit with, so it didn't really bother me as much because I was
Yeah.
used to the way they ate. But when my siblings would have their friends over, especially during, if we were to go on family vacation and they were to bring their friends, that always made things a little bit more tough. And I remember just, if they would bring out like chips and salsa or something, I'd be like, oh, well, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go on a run around
Right.
hotel, whatever, and just kind of exclude myself in those situations. And luckily, I always seemed to find an excuse to leave, but sometimes when I couldn't find an excuse, I just had to keep my mouth shut. And every once in a while, I could feel myself wanting to snap or wanting to make a tie mark, but I can't spoil my, my
Yeah.
vacation. So I would just kind of have to keep quiet. And then when they left the room, I would just be like, oh, I can't deal, kind of take a big breath.
You would never like start to put on earbuds or whatever while your
No,
siblings or yeah.
no, my parents were very, anti-technology when I was growing up. So,
Mm.
but only in recent years, if I'm in the car with my family and we're, pulling over and getting something. For example, I was with my parents the other day and we're in the car and we're having, we did something for my birthday and we pulled over for ice cream. And then as we're leaving, my dad starts to, go for the ice cream. And luckily, I had a few podcasts downloaded on my phone. So I just popped in one earbud and just kind of slightly tucked my finger in
Yeah.
my ear, and just kind of listened to their conversation and kind of listened to my podcast at the same time just to keep sane.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good to keep it a little bit of a balance, but yeah, but don't feel like you're completely isolated from what's
Right.
happening in the car. Did your family members, like your siblings, ever kind of tease you about it, like start to mock it and
Oh,
use it against
yeah.
you?
I'm from a very big family, and I'm the middle kid. I
Mm.
was nicknamed Baby Sadie as a little
Okay.
kid. If that can like summarize my relationship with my siblings for you, but they definitely poked fun at it sometimes, and it's understandable because they didn't really understand it. We were young,
Yeah.
we were kids, and luckily now they're starting to understand it a bit more and more. And I've noticed even with a few of my siblings, they're starting to pick up the same,
Yeah.
feelings towards people chewing and sniffing, not as strong, but they're starting to just kind of understand it a little bit more.
Interesting. Oh, understand it, or do you feel like maybe they might be exhibiting symptoms of something that
Maybe a little bit
could,
of,
yeah.
but mostly just understanding.
Gotcha. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, do you, well, so do you guys talk about it by name, like this fun, amongst your family, or is it just something that you kind of like try not to shine a spotlight on?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, we've never given it a name until recently, which I would say about 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm,
I just Googled it just to see, if there had been any sort of update on
okay.
what we have. And it gave me the name of misophonia. And I remember screenshotting it and sending it to my entire family. And I just kept on repeating, like, oh, it's misophonia. And then I was like, am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it misophonia or misophonia? Just playing around with it.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
And so it was so nice to put a label on it, but it was always kind of like the big elephant in the room. But we always just called it Sadie's thing, you know,
Uh-huh.
Sadie's
Gotcha.
problem. But they've learned to cope with it, and so have I. So they've been troopers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what happens usually is that I guess yeah, things happen at the home or whatever, and then after college, well, I guess you're in college. After college or during college, for a lot of people, it kind of like I don't know, dies down a little bit, and then it kind of proliferates later. Like, how has it been for you? Because you're also working now, so it's kind of like you're out in the world. That's kind of when things start to pick back up for people, it seems. These days, like, yeah, how is it for you? You're kind of on your own
Well,
generally.
I living in New York has been okay,
Hmm.
because I'm so constantly surrounded by people. Even when you're not alone, even when you think you're alone, you're not alone.
Right.
And I started working in a restaurant about, this past summer in June, I would say. And I was a hostess. And recently, everybody left the restaurant because the management wasn't that great. But it was just a little bit tough for me, just dealing with a new crowd of people that would come in and sit down and, eat the way that they wanted to eat. That was always a little bit tough.
Right.
But for the most part, I've learned just to, pick up good tactics, dealing with it. And I think I've handled it pretty well.
I mean, there is probably a lot of background noise in general, right, in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, definitely, the streets are never quiet. So it's not like you're in silence and hearing, but you're taking a subway and stuff. Sometimes you're like in an enclosed environment and you just can't.
Yeah, deal.
And if you have visual triggers, I mean, subways can be rough, I can imagine, right? So,
Yeah.
well, first of all, do you have like misokinesia, which is kind of the visual trigger aspect of this?
A little bit.
Yeah.
If I see somebody, for example, my mom has this thing with her nails, and so does my grandma. They both tend to constantly pick at their nails like this, just constantly flicking their nails. They have very good, healthy, strong nails, but they're always picking at them. And whenever I see it, I have to, reach over and be like,
Yeah.
nails down, Same people chew gum, that sort of thing. That's always bothered me. Typically, I just keep very tunnel visioned and
Yeah,
always make sure
yeah.
that my phone is charged and my earbuds are charged.
Right.
And when
Right.
they're not charged, oh boy, I
Yeah,
try
also you
very
have so
hard.
many of them. Right.
Yeah.
I
And
recommend keeping something wired too, just in case.
I
But
have like 6 batteries with me at all times. So, or a book. I feel like if
yeah,
I have something to look and check out, and just I've learned to kind of focus on other sounds or other visuals and just kind of breathe through it and
yep,
wait until the subway ride or what have you, wherever I am is just over. If I'm standing in line at the grocery store,
right,
anything.
right. And so, yeah, and in New York, have you met other misophones?
No, I have not.
No. Okay.
I have not. I
Did,
haven't met anybody. Honestly,
yeah,
you're the very first person I've ever really talked to about it for the past, since I was 8 or 7, besides
yeah.
my mom and besides my old therapist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're not the only one. There's ever since I started this, there's been lots of people who've come on and just said, this is the first time I've, uttered these words out loud, like beyond just Googling for it and kind of,
Yeah.
reading about it. So, and that's what this is kind of for, it's like there are like Facebook groups and whatnot, but it's just kind of like it ends up being a kind of a free for all of ranting, and you don't really get to kind of like dive in and see how similar our backgrounds are, at least in this regard. No
Yeah.
matter where we come from or whatever, it's kind of
And that's
strange.
something I really appreciated about your podcast, just listening to other people talk about it and just being like, oh, thank God. Just it gave me some breathing space a little bit. And I didn't even know that there was a convention for it, which I think it sounds amazing.
Yeah,
uh,
it's
I
been
need to,
virtual the last couple of years, but the in-person one, it sounds like, oh my gosh, this could be a nightmare. But they
yeah,
pick it's all like soft muffins and hard-boiled eggs, and for the food, and then you can just kind of go wherever you want. And then it's these conversations, like the kind of the lounge conversations, that are the best part of it. And that's when you're like, holy cow! It's like you talk to somebody, it's like, I feel like I know like half of your life already because we've suffered the same way. We've been in the same pizza parties and whatnot. So,
yeah. And it makes me feel like as if, like I can breathe a little bit more and that it's not just me, and I
right.
think it's so nice. And when I came across your podcast, I honestly texted my parents about it. I texted my grandparents about it. I was just like, it's not just me. There's an entire
Yeah.
community out there. And I was just over the moon.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, I'm hearing that it is helping people. So it's just great to hear that. While we wait for, research and better therapies.
Yeah.
to
For,
come
for
out.
real.
So other than, yeah, I mean, speaking of like other coping tips, do you have any other like kind of go-tos that are, I don't know, either your own or even just the common ones? You kind of hit all the major ones, I guess.
Yeah, the go-to is like the Holy Trinity, which is like earbuds, book, and dividing yourself and leaving the room. But I would say I don't really. If you're just starting to roll into misophonia and just starting to notice, you're picking up on all the symptoms, instead of snapping or clapping or banging or anything like that, I do recommend the tally marks just because it gives you, of course, I don't think it would be the best idea to constantly like make eye contact with the person as you're making their tally marks or anything that's a little
Right.
intense. But
Just give them the sheet of paper as you leave the room and tell them don't do this again.
just slide it across the table and don't even say anything.
Right.
Just hope they figure it out themselves. No, it's a nice silent way just to kind of let out that tension in your brain. Because for me, it's always been not necessarily anger, but more so almost like a fly buzzing in your ear. And it's almost like a full body fight or flight response. And it's almost painful in a sense in your brain. And so the tally marks help. I would say, hmm, as long as if you're in school, as long as you tell your teacher about it, if you're like in middle school, high school, as long as somebody is aware, like a
Yeah.
school counselor or something, I feel like that definitely helps.
Did you do that in high school?
I
Did you
did.
try to get accommodations? Yeah. How did
I
that
did.
go?
They would put me in a separate room for tests and things like that. And thank
Yeah.
goodness that they did because, kids are when they take tests, they get irritated or, start tapping that pencil or what have you. And so I would always be put in a separate room and I wouldn't tell anybody like, hey everybody, I'm gonna go to my separate room now. I would just get up and go. And luckily that worked out very, very well. I've never been great at school anyway, but that definitely helped for sure. As
Sure.
long as somebody knows, and I recommend the fake phone call thing as well. That definitely helps. Or I just need to use the restroom. It can be very lonely sometimes, but sometimes it's your only saving grace. I've discovered
Yeah.
me personally. Everybody's
Uh,
different.
yeah. No, that's great. The fake phone call. I had not thought of that. That's a good one. And you're in college. Do you go in person?
I've
Are
done
you
all it.
taking some classes, right? Or are you
Yeah,
full? Or are you trying to get like? Are you full time at a college while also doing work and?
I've taken it mostly all online so far
Okay,
because I'm
gotcha.
constantly, I'll have to be like in New York or
Traveling or whatever.
Chicago or, anywhere. And so it's kind of nice just to have those classes online and then I don't have to deal with
Yeah,
the classroom distractions or anything like that. And that can be a little bit lonely sometimes too, because I want to have that college experience, but I much prefer the path that I'm taking just
hmm,
because that's always been the path I've wanted. So I'm doing general studies right now, and then I hope to transfer those college credits over to hopefully a New York school
yeah,
when the time comes. And I kind of balance, I've thought about fashion for a long time, but then I thought, no, that doesn't sound like something I would really want to have a degree in. I would much prefer doing something like English or architecture history, something like that. I think that would be more up my alley, so to speak.
right. The reason why I asked, now there's a bit of an echo. I don't know. It's probably me, but yeah. The reason why I asked about college was because there have been. I know at UCLA there was a past guest who started like a misophonia support group and has been kind of slowly growing it. And it's the first time I'd heard of that. So
Yeah.
it's something that I always kind of recommend to people in college. It's probably easier to do when you're in person to kind of like get a room or whatever and invite a bunch of people. But there might be a way to you know um, meet some more students because I'm sure there are a bunch who are suffering in silence and who don't even know it has a name and are
Yeah.
just sitting there telling telling things at the back of Psych 101 or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, that's really nice to hear, honestly, because growing up, I'm from a very small town. So for other kids, I could tell that a few people saw my tally marks. I know that a couple kids in the class saw my tally marks and just
You
didn't know
wanted
what
them
they
to
were.
see it. I'm sure you kind of
Yeah.
like made it a little bit obvious to get the
Oof.
point across.
Yeah. Oh, just, I mean, I was like 10 at the time, but it's nice to hear that people are actually somewhat banding together and making more of a community out of it. I wish I had that growing up, for sure.
Yeah. No, I kind of optimistic, even though we're not going to get a cure anytime soon, or a
Yeah.
huge or hugely revolutionary therapy. But yeah, it's good to see that kids are hopefully more aware and are able to band together. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, maybe as we start to wrap up, yeah, you're talking about your future career goals, and are you thinking also not just things you like, but probably in terms of like what is the most miso friendly? Like, you can kind of you don't want to be in an open office environment.
I've been studying, I just started to study acting. And I've noticed that with the misophonia, that's starting to kick in a little bit because I
Mhm.
deal a lot with like theater people and singers. And when it comes down to people with that Broadway background or singing background, they use their voice a lot, they swallow a certain way, that
Okay.
thing. And I never really thought about that until I started to take my first acting class at a studio in New York. And, if I would do a rehearsal group with a couple of friends, I just never noticed it until I took my first class. And I just thought, can I handle this? Can I do this? Can I be surrounded by Broadway people and singers? But luckily, so far, I just kind of wait for them to take a sip out of their cup and then they continue on. And,
Yeah.
so,
Do
but
they kind of clear their throat to get things
yeah,
ready, or just a lot
yeah,
of throat exercises, probably, right? Because they're like, yeah, okay,
yeah. And
good to
that's
know.
it's taken more of a toll than modeling for sure.
Mm.
But I just tell myself, it's only for a few seconds, and then we move on. It has nothing to do with them. Let's just keep going, and everything will be fine. But um, in terms of with misophonia kicking in career wise, um, I can't ever escape it. No matter how hard I try,
Right.
unfortunately. And that's just the reality of it. And I'd much rather do something that makes me happy, instead of just sacrificing my happiness just to work by myself. Um, I thought about architecture history just because I love old buildings and, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and I love the history behind buildings and the art behind it. But what I really want to do is to continue acting and modeling as long as those industries will have me.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's really good. That's kind of it's a good way to think about what you want to do in the future, and what you want, like how much you want misophonia to affect it. Because yeah, you're right, it's not going to go away. So let's plan ahead for kind of how we're gonna manage that. Yeah, that's interesting. Have you so you just started to take some acting classes? Have you gotten any like jobs yet in terms of like, are you on the next tour of Hamilton yet, or
No, no. I actually just kind of fell into acting accidentally about a few years ago,
Mhm.
and right before I moved to New York. And I'm very, very, very green to it, like super
Okay.
green. And I really enjoy it. Luckily, I fall into the hands of some really sweet and very, talented people that have kind of guided me because I need all the guidance I can get when it comes down to this industry. Uh, but it so far so good.
Cool. Cool.
I've
Yeah.
started to do auditions recently this past year, and all of them have been, by video and submitting
Right.
online and that sort of thing. So I'm very eager to see what an in-person casting is like.
Yeah.
I'm
Gotcha.
very curious.
Well, at least I mean, while you're starting to do that, at least maybe you can get some modeling jobs with Christina, who's a past guest, and you guys can just kind of make a nice, do your jobs. It'll be super quiet, obviously, and then you can kind of commiserate on the misophonia stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe it's time to kind of wrap up. But is there anything else you kind of want to share with people who are listening?
Well, I think I'm guessing a lot of your listeners are people with misophonia or have somebody that they know with misophonia. And for you as well, it's so nice just to like talk to somebody
Hmm.
who's gone through it. And you're the first person, like I said, that has, that also has it that I've ever talked to. And it just kind of takes a big weight off my chest. And I'm very thankful to know that there's something out there that people can turn to and just talk to about it. And I hope one day that there'll be more research on it. And, thank God that they finally put a name to it. And I'm very grateful towards that. In fact, my mom came up to me the other day. She watches Longmire. Have you ever seen it?
I don't think so. Is that a show on like a Netflix kind of thing or?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Okay.
about like a sheriff out in Wyoming, and so
Yeah,
she
yeah.
loved that show. And I guess one of the bad guys on an episode was freaking out, and he's like, if you stop tapping, I have misophonia. It's a real thing. Look it up. And she came
Oh,
over and she played it for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was nice to see it like out and on a Netflix show.
there was
And
another Netflix show that yeah, I got apparently got mentioned recently, but I need to check that out as well. So it's starting to appear in yeah, in various places. So well, that's the other thing I'm hoping that so I mean my focus honestly is like, especially talking to people, is like getting us misophones to talk more to each other about it, because the more stories I hear, the more I'm like, we need to like we need to kind of take care of ourselves first. I mean, we need to do the awareness, but I had no idea how like deep some of these problems are, and how how many people are affected by it. But I think, yeah, like getting it out in the world, and having people just not look at us weird when we ask for,
no,
you know,
um,
s- a basic accommodation would be huge, because as you know, as I'm sure you know, stress is a major factor, right? So if we can just be in a situation where, okay, we might be getting triggered, but we don't have to stress out about it getting worse. We can just tell somebody to knock it off and they won't be offended by it. I think that would just generally make us less prone to being triggered in the first place. And that could be a virtuous cycle.
right. Have you picked up any sort of like techniques or anything like that? Do you tend to have a lot of stress yourself, or have you come up
Um,
with very many coping things with when it comes down to stress?
yeah, when it comes to, I mean, it's kind of the basic stuff like sleep is a big factor. Being honestly like it just having I don't know, having like a steady job. It must be tough if you have like a more irregular income, because it's like, I think when you're stressing about money, that's a major stressor. That could be just make you a tense. Going into like meals and thinking in advance, like reminding your brain that, okay, a meal doesn't last more than usually 20-30 minutes. You can kind of time box it that way, and that can kind of like get you through. That's another thing. Just having earbuds around and not necessarily like taking them out, but just having them within arm's reach is, uh, just it's just kind of that crutch that you can kind of like, your brain can now feel like, okay, I'm not going to die, and somebody's not going to come and attack me after they start chewing, kind of thing, because that's what our brains are telling us, is like, you're about to die. So,
Yeah.
those are kind of, yeah, those are, little things to kind of reduce stress. But the other thing is like, I also started to remind myself, if I act out, that's going to make the situation more stressful. So do you want
Right.
it to get worse, or do you want to just like bottle it up? I mean, that's not necessarily a healthy thing either, but it's just like, a lot of people come on and say like, we want to say something to the person, but it's like, we've all been like dissed so many times that it's just like, is it worth it, and so
Yeah.
we kind of, so
And then they start to, as soon as they like bring out, whatever it is, like a piece of gum, or start to, do whatever it is that triggers you, they're like, oh, sorry, I can't do that. You're in the, and it
oh
gets
yeah,
almost to the point where it gets a little irritating. Pretty
well
recently,
that's, yeah, sorry, go on.
sorry. Pretty recently I had, a family member say, well, you're diseased. And so I, can't deal with the fact that you're diseased. And that struck me pretty, it struck a chord for sure, because it's not a disease. It's just, our brains are, that's just the way it works for us. And, sometimes I just think to myself, if this person has such an issue with it, do I really want to be around that person anyway? So in
Hmm.
a strange way, when I try to put a spin on it and put a positive spin on it, I'm like, well, then it just goes to show me, that person's character, which it sounds a little ridiculous, but sometimes you just have to learn how to put a positive spin on these little
Yeah, well,
episodes.
I mean, we make friends with people for one reason or another, and we don't make friends with other people for one reason or another. And this is as valid as any other
Yeah.
reason, even though their family is just, well, I mean, you don't have to shut them out, but you can kind of, in my mind, I definitely say, okay, I'm recalibrating this relationship now. Like if that's going to be the interaction, because as you know, I mean, interactions like that lead to all this. There's a lot of shame and guilt that kind of builds up, right? Because we
Yeah.
bottle things up, we get told all this stuff by family members, and then we feel bad for making other people feel bad, and it's a cycle that is not really healthy. But we've all kind of grown up with it.
Yeah. But I feel my heart goes out to other people that deal with it too, because it's just a lot. It's a lot that weighs down on a person, and it's not easy at all. And so I'm very eager to see, as time goes on, just what people will discover about it, and what people, will start to, if there will be um, a solution
A
or
pill.
something. A
No,
pill.
but it'll be more like
Nice.
it's probably more like a therapy, right? These days, I guess CBT is kind of the therapy of choice.
I looked up some things about it, and I don't want to say anything that might like trigger anybody. You know, trust me, I don't. But I saw that there was like some research they had when they first started to put everything together with misophonia. They put people in like a room and put like headphones on, and then thought that they could get the misophonia out of a person by constantly playing their triggers, in their ears, and just being like, we'll do like intense therapy. And I just can't imagine. That's my idea of pure torture right there.
Yeah,
Like
that's
Chinese,
exposure.
what's
Yeah,
it called? Like Japanese or Chinese torture, like the water torture sort of thing. To me,
yeah.
that's true torture.
Yeah, I know that's exposure theory. That's like medieval stuff. But that's
Yeah.
like it's as recent as like as some of it I think is still going on. But that's like what all people could think of like 5-10 years ago.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, no,
uh,
no.
these days it's more about kind of like rational. Like I think what you said at some point earlier, just rationalizing like it's not. Here's the reason behind this sound. It's not here to hurt me, kind of thing. These are the kinds of tools that if you go to if you throw money down to a therapist, this is a CBT therapist, they'll obviously do it in a much more sophisticated way. But this kind of rationalizing and kind of thinking about reframing your thoughts is kind of so far the best way, and you don't have to be exposed to any
Right,
sounds in your headphones.
right.
So, well, cool. Yeah. Well, Sadie, how did the interview feel? Hopefully,
I feel like
it was
I
good.
ramble a little bit,
No,
but thank you for
well,
having me anyway.
yeah, yeah. No, this is great, and yeah, I wish you the best in yeah, school, acting, modeling, all that stuff. And yeah, it was great to have you on.
I really appreciate it big time. Very grateful towards you. And I'm grateful for what you're doing. Trust me.
Thank you, Sadie. Super nice to talk to you. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can contact me by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website, misophoniapodcast.com. And, it's even easier, just send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast or on Facebook, also at Misophonia Podcast. And on Twitter, it's a little different. It's Misophonia Show. You can support the show financially if you can by visiting our Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Thank you. Music as always is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.